Hey there, it's John Fleischman with SoDoesItMatter.com, all California politics, all of the time. And yesterday, big news came out of Sacramento that is ultimately, I think, great news for taxpayers, but it needs to be unpacked. So I'm going to try to do that now, but let me ask you to do one thing before I do that. Please like and share this video and column below. Spread the word. And if you have a free subscription here, that's awesome and that's great. There's thousands and thousands of you, and I appreciate you all. I'd really encourage you to consider upgrading it to a paid subscription. It's not much, but it helps support my work while giving you access to actually a lot more content than you already have. Okay, with that aside, here's what happened. Most Californians have no idea that state law contains a little-known provision that allows the proponents of a citizen-initiated initiative, that's the one where you have to go out and gather signatures, to once you've qualified for the ballot, you can voluntarily pull the measure off the ballot before a hard deadline. The reason for that provision to exist is pretty simple. Sometimes both sides on an issue would rather make a deal rather than spending tens of millions of dollars on each side, maybe fighting a statewide campaign. This is not a cheap place to talk to a heck of a lot of voters. Anyways, both sides would give something up in theory, and then both sides get something in return. In California, yesterday was that deadline, June the 25th. Literally, with only hours remaining before the window closed, one of the most significant taxpayer deals in recent California political history came together. I actually can't believe it came together, given how much the Democratic Party and the unions in Sacramento like to raise taxes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what was originally headed for the November ballot. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, HJTA as we all call it, had qualified the Save Prop 13 initiative. I've written about it here. The signatures had been gathered. The measure had qualified. It was headed to the voters. And that measure, Save 13, would have done two major things. First, it would have permanently closed what is known as the Upland loophole. Back in 2017, the California Supreme Court suggested, actually without fully ruling on it, that if a local special tax measure was placed on the ballot through an initiative process, so through signatures, instead of being put there by a city council or a board of supervisors or some other government body, just maybe it didn't need the traditional 2/3 vote required under Prop 13. Maybe a simple majority was enough. That may sound like legal minutia, but it actually was a huge deal because once local governments and public employee unions realized that that loophole existed, they started to use it, like they drove a truck through it. Instead of government officials placing tax measures on the ballot and needing a 2/3 approval, these unions could gather signatures, place the measure on the ballot themselves, and potentially pass taxes with only a 50% plus one vote. And they did a lot of it. Enter the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. They wanted to put an end to this once and for all, and the Save 13 measure, it really made it clear, very, very clear, that the 2/3 requirement was to be adhered to. You couldn't get around it. It restated it, and it didn't matter who put the measure before the voters. It would take a 2/3 vote, no exception, no workarounds, no loopholes. All right. The second thing that the proposed Prop 13 initiative would have done was attack local real estate transfer fees. Most notably in Los Angeles, their measure ULA, which many people call the mansion tax. This initiative would have retroactively invalidated transfer taxes that exceeded limits imposed on general law cities. That sounds complicated, but the bottom line is what used to be little document fees, they drove another truck through a loophole and started charging massive amounts of money, massive taxation, calling it a document fee. Anyways, had the Prop 13 measure heading to the ballot, Save 13 passed, it would have done away with that abuse of that, and it would have undone many years going backwards. Billions of dollars in current local revenue would have been gone, potentially, or they'd all have had to been revoted on with a 2/3 vote instead of a majority. Supporters like Jarvis, argued that those taxes were hurting housing production and driving away investment. Opponents viewed eliminating these revenues as politically unacceptable. And that takes us to the opposition. Governor Gavin Newsom opposed the measure, the Save Prop 13 measure. Legislative Democrats opposed the measure. But most importantly, California's big unions, especially the public employee unions, opposed the measure. And frankly, those are the players that matter in most of these kinds of fights because local special taxes fund programs, projects, salaries, pensions, and public sector expansion. The unions were never going to sit quietly while a constitutional amendment threatened that revenue stream. What was shaping up to be what was shaping up was what would be an absolutely brutal statewide campaign all the way through to the November ballot. HJTA was not alone in this fight. Standing with them were three major business organizations: the California Business Roundtable, led by Rob Lapsley, the California Taxpayers Association, led by Rob Gutierrez, and the California Business Properties Association, represented by Matthew Hargrove. That's a serious taxpayer and business coalition, but even with that kind of support, they were still preparing for a serious war. Then negotiations start. The first offer reportedly wasn't enough. It involved some sort of statutory changes rather than constitutional protections, and anyone who has spent enough time around Sacramento understands the difference. A statute can be changed next year. A constitutional amendment can never be changed except by another vote of the public. If you're giving up a qualified ballot measure that is a constitutional amendment, you don't do that for promises that can disappear in the next legislative session. So that deal died. Then yesterday, on the deadline, with the clock ticking, John Kupal made a very smart move, I think. He put his demands in writing, publicly, not ambiguously. No handshake agreement, no misunderstandings later. 4 conditions that had to be met. First, the legislature, if they wanted this off the ballot, the legislature had to place a separate new constitutional amendment on the ballot that permanently closed the Upland loophole and restored the 2/3 requirement for all local special taxes, regardless of who proposed them. That, in this proposal, has become ACA 22. Secondly, Democrats had to remove another ballot measure that I haven't talked about yet called ACA 13 from the ballot. ACA 13 was essentially a poison pill. It would have required that future initiatives that raised voter thresholds for taxation had to pass by the threshold that they wanted the taxes to be passed by. So if theoretically you wanted to impose a 3/5 vote on taxation, the measure to impose that would have had to pass by a 3/5 vote. Anyways, in plain English, it would have forced taxpayer groups to win by 2/3 in order to establish a future 2/3 requirement. No thanks. Third, both actions had to be completed by both houses of the legislature before 5 o'clock yesterday. The deadline. Votes first, signatures second. Fourth, Howard Jarvis and John Kupal had to retain control over the official ballot argument that voters would read in their state voter guide. Remarkably, the deal came together. Both houses passed ACA 22, and also the Senate and Assembly removed the poison pill measure ACA 13 from the ballot, and the votes were recorded. The deadline was met. John, of course, always keeps his promises, and he withdrew the original initiative. So what did taxpayers get out of this? The core objective. The Upland loophole will be closed if ACA 22 passes this November. The 2/3 requirement will be placed firmly and reaffirmed firmly in the Constitution for any efforts to raise taxes. And the attempt to make future taxpayer protections harder to pass through ACA 13 vaporized. Those are meaningful wins. But let's be honest about what was given up. The transfer tax provisions are gone. The retroactive elimination of those, including Measure ULA, are gone. They ended up on the cutting room floor as a part of this compromise. So if your primary goal was undoing those particular taxes, you could tell that was a real concession. However, that fight isn't gone. It's just postponed to another day and obviously can also be fought locally. Anyone pretending that that issue is settled is not giving you the full story. Ultimately, voters will have the final say in November. But it's worth mentioning that if ACA 22 passes, the new measure that's on the ballot, HJTA will have secured the core taxpayer protections they were after all along, and they will have done it without a major war. I think that's the case here. I mean, the unions could still fight it, but it's much harder to fight this measure. And I should add, by the way, if there are new transfer taxes attempted after this November, if it passes, they'd all have to pass by the 2/3 vote. Anyway, so that's what happened. I've always told people that if you want to be able to depend on one strong person to represent taxpayers, you could bank on John Kupal. He did it right here. He got a good deal, and that's what happened. So thanks for listening to this. There's more details in the column below. And remember to please like, share, and subscribe to this. And if you're enjoying this content and want to support more California political analysis that digs deeper beneath the headlines, please consider being a subscriber and ideally a paid subscriber here at SoDoesItMatter.com. I'm John Fleischman, and we'll see you next time.